The React landscape has changed quite a lot in the past few years, where we used to doing everything on the client side. We used to working with hooks, state management. But in the recent years, by using frameworks such as NextJS, React can now be rendered on the server side. And with the introduction of React server components, a lot of confusion has been created, and I was not able to fully understand what is exactly all of these things: server side rendering, React server components, client components. How do all of these things work internally? With the help of this video, we are going to build a food recipe app, and we are going to figure out how all of these three things work internally. We are not going to use any framework. I hope by the end of this video, all of your doubts related to these concepts are clear, and if nothing else, at least you will be hungry after looking at all of these food recipe images. Alright, so let's begin the tutorial now. I have created a basic project structure over here. Let's go through that. Here we have a server.js, and let's examine the contents of our package.json file. So we have added the following dependencies: Babel core, Babel plugin, Express, and React. And here we have a start script to start the server, and we have a node.jsx loader which we will need in order to make the server understand JSX. And we have a recipes folder which has all of the recipe files, because we are going to be building a food recipe app, right? So these are added over here. We'll come back to this folder a bit later on, and we'll look at this file as well in just a bit. So let's begin by creating a Express server. So we are going to import Express, and we don't need these. Let's create a server which is going to listen to port 3000. Let's add a default endpoint. Let's send a hello world response right now, and let's listen to that port, and we will say RSC React server component app is listening on this port. Alright, let's make a slight modification to our start script. I'm using Node version 22, so you can pass this watch flag over here so that it can watch the changes which are occurring and restart the server. Alright, and you can say node hyphen run, and you can say start. You no longer need npm when you're using node version higher than 22. Alright, in case you are on a older version of node, you can make use of a package like nodemon to watch the file changes, and you can use the npm start script to start this script, right? So let's run this. So you can see our app is listening on port 3000. Let's open the browser and see the response that we are going to get. Alright, so I have opened the browser over here, and it's listening to port 3000, and you can see that we're getting the response as hello world. Okay, now instead of sending this text, let's send a HTML document. Let's create a variable const HTML equals, and we will try and send this HTML structure that we have and see how it is working. Let's add a footer over here as well, and this is the footer. We'll add a closing footer tag, and let's save this. Let's send the HTML as response. Okay, let's do a reload. So you can see we are getting hello world, and this is the footer text, right? Suppose I have this variable, and it has the following properties. Let's call this as first name and last name. If I wanted to show this over here, I can say person.first name and person.last name. So this is how I can add variables within my JavaScript, right? If we do a reload, you can see we're getting this text. Now, instead of using HTML like this, let's make use of JSX, right? Because JSX allows us to represent HTML as JavaScript objects. So it's easier to write JSX compared to HTML as a string, right? So let's do that right now. Here, let's rename this variable to JSX, and let's get rid of this and this, and here we have this part. Right now, let's save this, and you can see the moment we save this, it's telling us unexpected token. Node.js server is not able to understand this JSX syntax. So that is why we have this Node.jsx loader, and we are going to make use of Babel, and we are going to make use of this plugin transform react JSX, which allows us to transform our JSX into JavaScript objects, right? So here we have written a loader. There's a load function. So here we are using ESM modules, right? So we are just going to check if the format is a module, and we are going to make use of Babel, and we are going to call the transform async function, pass the source code, right? Whether it is server.js or any other file, along with these options that we have defined over here. That should give us a transformed code which will convert the JSX part into JavaScript object, which is then understood by our Node.js server, right? And we are going to return this converted file instead. So this is what this does. In order to use this, let's come to our package.json, and we are going to say hyphen hyphen import, and we are going to give the path to our loader. So node.jsx loader.js, like this. Let's save this and let's restart our server. So you can see those errors are gone. Now we are able to use JSX. Let me just show you all the transformed code once. So I will say over here log new result dot code. All right. So you can see it has gone through our server.js file. It has imported this JSX function, and wherever we were using JSX, right, it has converted that into a JavaScript object, which you can see over here on the screen. All right. Let me reload the page, and it's saying, oh, HTML is not defined over here. Instead of HTML, we need to specify JSX. Now let's try and reload the page, and you can see we are getting this structure, right? As I told you, JSX allows us to represent HTML tags as JavaScript objects. So you can see it is giving us the entire hierarchy. Right at the top, we have the HTML tag, right? Then its children, right? The head and the body tag are available as props, and the children property is there. It has these two items, right? The head tag and the body tag. The head in turn has these three items as children, right? You can see the first meta tag, the second meta tag, and the third meta tag, right? And the attributes of these tags are in turn available as props. You can see over here name, content. These are the attributes of this meta tag. And similarly, if we take a look at the body object, it has these children, which is h1 footer, right? So h1 and the footer, and footer in turn has these children, right? The footer, it has the children, which is this paragraph, and the paragraph has this text, right? So this text is also the children of this paragraph. So this entire HTML structure is now being represented as a JavaScript object because we're using JSX. So now let's do server-side rendering on this JSX. In order to do that, we will write a function which converts this JSX into HTML tags. All right, let's do that over here. Function convert JSX to HTML. This is going to accept the JSX object, and this is going to be a recursive function. It will go through all of these objects that you see over here and try to convert it into a HTML tag. So we are going to check if type of JSX is string. Okay, if this is a string, or type of JSX is number, we are going to return the JSX as it is. So this is for all the text nodes, right? Like this text that we have over here, hello world, written by so these are all the text content which is there inside a tag. So we want to return that as it is. So in that case, we are going to return JSX as it is. Also, let's install a package to escape any of these special characters. So we are going to say, let's split the terminal. Npm add escape html. So I have added this package. Let's make use of this over here. Import escape html from escape html, and we will pass our JSX to this escape html function, right? Next thing is, you notice over here that the children can be an array, right? Then what we also need to check if JSX is equal to null, right? So this will handle both null and undefined, or type of JSX is boolean. In that case, we want to return an empty string. Then if you notice over here, the children property is an array, right? And it can have multiple HTML tags inside it. So what we need to do is we will check else if array dot is array, right? If the JSX is array, what we will do is we will loop through all of the child elements, call the convert JSX to HTML function on them, and then whatever is the output returned by this function, right, we will join them with an empty string so that we have the nested content of a HTML tag. So for example, we are building the content of the body tag, right? So all of these will be available as children, and we want to extract, we want to create the HTML tags out of them and then join all of them using a string. Then ultimately all of this is an object, right? So we are going to check else if type of JSX is an object. Then another thing that I wanted to show you guys is, before we are actually sending this JSX to our server, let's log this JSX once. Okay, and we'll complete this function in just a bit. Let me reload the page. And if you notice over here, for every React element, there's this special property which is $$ type of, and it is the symbol for React element, right? When it is being sent over to the client, right, this property is lost in the transfer process. Okay, over the network, this property is lost. When this is being sent over the wire, it is trying to be converted into a string, and when stringification happens, the symbols are lost, right? So that's why you don't see this property over here, but it is there, and this is used to identify a React element. So React adds this for each React element. Okay, so we are checking over here if the type of JSX is an object, right? And then we also need to check whether it is a tag, right? Whether it's a tag like the head tag, the body tag, or so on. So if it's this tag, it will have this type of property which will be equal to symbol for React element. Okay, so let's add a check over here. If JSX dot $$ type of is equal to symbol for React element, that means it's a React element and we need to convert this into an HTML tag. So here what we are going to say is that let HTML, okay, is equal to, so we have the opening bracket and then we are going to specify JSX.type. This type property will give us the name of the tag. So we have the opening tag, right? Then we will try and build the attributes for this tag. Okay, so for that we're going to make use of the for in loop. Let prop name in JSX.props. So if you take a look over here, right, the props contains the attributes. So we are going to have HTML plus equals, okay, instead of convert JSX to HTML, we are going to say escape HTML, and we are going to pass the value of this field, right? So we are going to say props of props name, okay, over here. So this will set the attributes, and the next thing that we want to do is we want to close the HTML tag, right? this tag that we have opened over here, the opening bracket, we want to close this. So HTML plus equals, and we have the closing tag, then sorry, the closing right, this closing part, the opening angle bracket, and then the closing angle bracket. Then since we are inside a tag, right, for example we are inside the body, then we want the HTML for the h1, the footer, and this part as well, right? So these are all available as children, right? So we will call this function recursively on the children field. So we are going to say HTML plus equals convert JSX to HTML on the children object, right, which is available inside the props. And then we are going to finally close the tag, right? So here we have HTML and we have the closing tag, and then we are going to return this HTML. All right. If it's anything else apart from symbol for React element, we are going to throw a new error, and we are going to say cannot render an object over here, and else, right, if all of these if and else ifs are exhausted, we are going to throw a new error over here. Whatever this is, it has not been implemented yet, so we're going to say not implemented yet. All right, let's save this. All right, and here instead of sending JSX directly, right, we will get the HTML. So HTML is we will call convert JSX to HTML on the JSX that we have, and then we will send the HTML as response. Let's save this. Let's do a reload, and you can see that it is saying hello world written by Gaurav Sen. So if you notice, we receive this $Gaurav $Sen, right? So since we are using JSX, we can basically just get rid of this because interpolation works by default. And let's save this, right? We are no longer using template literal syntax. Now if we do a reload, now you're getting the correct output. So this is how you convert JSX to HTML. So another functionality that is available in React is that you can make use of components. Let's do that now. Let's write a component for this part. So let me cut this from here, and we'll create a component function author, right? And this is going to expect a first name and last name prop, and this is the JSX which this component is going to return. And let's just get rid of this, and here in the footer we'll pass the author component, and like this, and we're going to say we'll destructure this person object and pass it here. Let's save this. Let's do a reload, and you can see that we are no longer able to see this text in the footer. So you can see that this is getting passed as a function over here, right? The function text as it is. Another thing that we notice over here, we're getting this children object. So let's add a condition over here. If JSX dot has own property prop name, that means this prop name should exist as a direct property in this object, right? It's not available on the prototype or something, so that we are able to build the attributes correctly. And right, since we are handling children separately, correct, let's ignore the children property, and we need to say prop name is not equal to children. That is the scenario where we want to build the attributes. Okay, actually let's move this condition. This should be inside our loop, right? Because that is what we're using to build the attributes. Let's save this. Let's do a page reload, and you can see that we have the correct HTML structure over here, and it's returning this function as it is right over here. This isn't useful to us, right? It is just sending this function as a string as it is over the wire. So now let's teach our convert JSX to HTML function to handle components as well. So here where we are checking the symbol for React element, we will check the type of the JSX.type property, right? So in case of a React element, the type of this is going to be a string, but if it's going to be a component, the type of this is going to be a function. Okay, so here let's add the check if type of JSX.type, okay, if this is a string. So all of the code that we had written earlier, right, this goes inside this if block. Else if the type of JSX.type is a function, we're going to get the reference of the function via right, which is nothing but this component, and we will call this component with these props. Okay, and we are going to execute this function, so it will return the JSX, right? We are going to execute this component and it will give us the JSX. And since our function is able to handle JSX and convert it into an HTML, it will be also able to convert the component into a HTML, right? So const component equals JSX.type and const props is equal to JSX.props. And basically here we're going to get the component JSX and we will call the component or execute this component with the props of the component, right? And basically call the convert JSX to HTML function on the JSX returned by our component. Let's save this, right? Let's do a reload. And now we're even able to see the contents of our author component. So this is our basic server-side rendering of a React application. So now we'll move on to React server components and we'll build a food recipe app so that we understand how React server components work. So here, if you notice, we have a recipes folder and this folder has a few recipe files. So here we have the recipe for chocolate chip cookies. You have a name, you have ingredients, you have instructions, and you have some tags, some ratings, right? So these are some properties which are available in each of these JSON files, right? So we are going to make use of these files and this will serve as a database for showing all the recipes. So the first thing that we will do is we will move all of this out into a layout component. This component is going to accept children as props. So whatever elements we are nesting inside the layout, they will be shown within the layout, right? So let's copy this and let's return this structure that we have. And here we'll make use of the main tag and this will contain the children, and we have our footer which has the author just like before. Let's move this person object in here and here let's get rid of this and pass a layout component here and let's get rid of this, right? And here we will pass a h1 tag and we will say intro to React server components. Let's save this and let's see if this is working. So you can see we are seeing this text intro to React server components here, right? So our layout is working. Now let's build the home page which will list all the recipes that we have. So let's create a component for our home page, function home. So we are going to list all the recipes. Now, since we are on the server, right, and our component is also being executed on the server, does that mean our component has access to all the resources that a server has and it can do all those things which are possible inside a node server? So let's find out. We'll try to read these files and list down the recipe title. Okay, let's see if it's possible to do this or not. So const recipe files, and let's make use of read directory function, which is provided by Node. So we're going to say import read directory from node :fs promises, and we will give the path over here. So it's available in the recipes folder, right? Let's try to log all the recipe files, and let's just return some dummy text over here. This is the home page, and here we will have the home component like this. All right, let's save this. Let's do a reload of the app. So we are getting a promise over here. Since this is a promise, let's make use of await to get the complete response. Now, since we are using await, right, does that mean we can turn our component into an asynchronous component? Let's see. Let's do reload, and it's giving us some error, but you can see over here that we were able to read all of these files, right? You are able to read all of the file names. So our React component is able to read the resources on the server, and it has become asynchronous in nature. So we have just taught our server how to execute components asynchronously, and this is one of the main benefits of React server components, right? That if you wanted to access a resource from the client, right, traditionally you would write that inside a use effect, and you would make a HTTP call, right, which would then load that data from wherever that data is available. So that's another network request. Once the data is available, it will then try to update the UI. Now here, what you can do is you can fetch the data right here at the server side. Once the data is available, you can build the HTML based on the data which is there, and then that HTML is being sent to our browser. So all of this happens within a single request, right? Whereas earlier you would download the code for executing your component, and then your component would have the logic to fetch the data. So those would be multiple, back and forth calls. Whereas here, all of this happens in a single call. So this is a benefit of using React server components. You're able to, eliminate that entire HTTP call or an entire layer. For instance, even if you are using a database, since this component is on the server, you can directly communicate with the database through the server instead of making an HTTP call. So this allows us to fetch data faster for our component, and our component also gets, or overall our entire page gets rendered faster. All right, so we are getting this error, right? Cannot render an object. That is because our component has now become asynchronous in nature, right? So we need to modify our JSX to HTML function so that it is able to handle asynchronous components as well. So the only change that we need to do here is that we will replace this with an await, and now this becomes an async function. And wherever we were calling this function, we need to ensure that we are awaiting its response. We are doing it over here as well. Let's modify this a bit also. So we will say let child HTML. Since this is going to return a promise, right? Let's execute these promises in parallel by making use of promise.all function. So we're going to say await promise.all jsx.map convert JSX to HTML, and then we're going to call the join function on this, and that is what we are going to return. Let's get rid of this existing code. Let's save this now. Let's do a reload, and now we no longer get that error that we were getting earlier. Right now over here we are getting this empty object, right? Since this function has become asynchronous in nature, we need to await its response. Let's turn this into an async function as well. Let's save this. Let's do a reload now, and you can see we're getting this text. This is the home page. We are also able to perform file read and write operations that we are normally able to do within a Node server. Right now, let's build the layout for our home page. So I have already prepared the styles for the home page. So we are going to serve all of the static assets from our public folder. So we are going to add the static middleware provided by Express in order to serve all of our static content. Let's create a public folder over here, and let's add style.css. Let me add all of these styles over here. Let's save this. We will add a express middleware here, app.use express.static, and we are going to say we are going to serve the contents of the public folder. So all of the contents inside the public folder will be served as static assets for our website. Okay, let's go to our layout, and here let's link our style.css. Let's finish building our home page. So we will show cards for our recipes that we have. Let's create these slugs, or basically URLs for each of our recipes, and then whenever we are clicking on a recipe, it will show the detailed information regarding that recipe. Const recipe slugs equal to recipe files dot map, and we are going to say file and file dot replace. We're going to replace .json with an empty string so that you get just chocolate chip cookies, classic pizza. So that is the URL that is going to be built. So we have these slugs over here. Here, let's create a article tag, and let's give the heading. Let's make use of the h1 tag, recipes, or rather let's call it my recipes, and then we will have a section which will have all of the recipe cards. So recipe, yeah, let's make use of this function, and here instead of this we will pass our recipe card component. So let's create a component, functional component, recipe card, which is going to accept a slug. For now, it's just going to return an article with the provided slug. Let's build out this much functionality first, and so this is going to return a recipe card. We will pass it the slug. Let's give the key as the slug as well, and let's save this. Let's do a reload, and you can see we have all of the recipe slugs listed over here on our page. Let's enhance our UI now. So here we will have a UL tag. Let's give this a class name, recipe list, and let's move all of this inside this, and we will have our list item here. Okay, let's give this the key as slug as well. Let's save this, then let's modify our recipe card. Let's put an anchor tag here, and we will have the href over here like this. We are going to say $slug, right? So when we click on the particular recipe card, it should send a request to our server, which will in turn send the detailed recipes page. Okay, and so we have our anchor tag. Within the anchor tag, we will have our article tag. Let's give this the class content, and let's call this as recipe card. Okay, so all of these classes I have created beforehand, and they're available, they're defined inside style.css, so I'm not spending time on the styling part. You guys can go through that part on your own. I'll share the source code in the description, right? So here we have the content, and then let's show the image of the recipe. So we have the image URL available over here. We will make use of that property. So what we need to do is let's leave this blank for now, and here we will say name of the recipe dollar. We'll give this blank over here. We'll add it later on. Let's get rid of the source set attribute, and we'll have another h1 for displaying the name of the recipe. So let's leave this blank as well. We'll add all of those fields later on. Let's give this the class name recipe title. Let's give this class name recipe image like this. All right, and now let's try to fetch the contents of a particular recipe. So we have this slug, right? So we're going to read the contents of the recipe by making use of the read file function, which is provided by the file system node module. So we are going to say const recipe equals read file. Okay, it's available at this path. All right, since this is an asynchronous function, we need to wait for its result. Okay, let's turn this into a async component. Then here, and let's parse this JSON, and we are interested in the name and the image properties, right? So we have destructured only those properties, and here let's give the image and pass the name here, and for the title, once again we will pass the recipe name like this. Let's save our recipe card component and let's do a reload. So we are getting this structure: chocolate chip cookies, margarita pizza, and am I missing something here? Let's see. Article section UL. Is our style file being loaded? No. Let's see if we made a mistake here. So none of our attributes are being printed correctly. Right. So we made a mistake over here. This needs to be jsx.props.has own property over here. Let's do a reload. All right. So you can see all of our attributes are also now being printed, and then we have our reference to style.css here, and then we have the content, we have the recipes, then we have this section, and we have the recipe list. All right, so all of this is now being rendered correctly. Let me just cross check once whether I have added all of the classes. So if you notice over here, instead of the class attribute, we're getting this class name attribute, and this is not understood by HTML. This is something that React understands. So let's make a slide modification to our code. Before we are sending all of our HTML over here, right, we're going to say HTML dot replace all. We're going to replace this class name with class. Okay, when we are converting JSX to HTML, we are going to replace all the class name attributes with class. Let's save this. Let's do a reload now, and now we have the proper layout and all of our classes are being applied. You can see over here, instead of class name we see class, and this is the layout that we have right now. Let's click on this. So it's going to this URL, but since we have not defined a route for this, nothing is being shown. But you can see that we have this basic React server component and a server side rendered React app. Correct. Let's add some more classes to our layout. So for the main, we have this class which is called container. Let's save this. Also, let's add a header which is going to contain some navigation. So let's add a nav tag, and this is just going to have a reference to our link page, right? And let's close the header. The class for this is main header. Let's save this. Let's do a reload. So you can see we have this header, recipes, and then our footer like this. Now let's work on the next part where we are clicking on this link and it should show us the detailed content of that recipe. Since we are having multiple pages now, right, let's build a router as well. So function router, this is going to accept a URL as prop, and we'll have a page variable here. We're going to check if URL is slash, right, page will be the home component, else page is going to be the recipe component, which we are just going to build right now, and it will show the detailed recipe, and we are going to return our layout with this particular page, and here we're going to pass our router with the URL that we're getting from the request. Let's also build the recipe component. So the recipe component is going to accept a slug as well. Let's just return some dummy value right now. Detailed recipe. Okay, and the slug is nothing but the URL that we're getting here, like this. Let's save this. Let's do a reload. So here we are seeing the home page, and when we're clicking on a particular recipe, okay, right. So if you notice over here, we have only written a router for the slash, right? Let's add asterisk over here so that this becomes a generic router. So all of the requests will be handled through this function now. And let's go back. Let's save this and let's do a reload. So you can see that this page is being rendered. Now when I click on this same request will come over here and this URL will be passed to our router. All right. And you can see that it has now gone to the detailed, it's showing the recipe page now, and we're seeing this text. Okay, so the routing is working. Now let's build this. Once again, we are going to read the contents of our recipe. So we have the same logic as before. We read the recipe file, and this is an asynchronous function now. Let me shrink this a bit. ASYNC async. Okay, so we have the recipe. We are interested in particular fields such as name. Let's show the instructions, the ingredients, the image of the recipe, and let's also show the rating. All right, so these are the fields that we are going to use, and let's define the structure for this. So we have this article tag. Let's give it the class name recipe. Let's close this tag. Let's add a header. This header is going to contain the name of the recipe. So h1 tag, we'll pass the name over here, give this the title, recipe title. Okay, and let's show the rating over here. So we'll use the h3 tag and we'll say rating. We'll pass the rating variable here. So this is the header. Then we have the image. The source is the image, the value of image. Then let's add the alt text over here. Name of the recipe. Let's get rid of the source set property. Let's add a section for the recipe details, and let's add another section. Let's split it into two sections. So once the first section is going to be for the recipe ingredients, and then we are going to have another section for the recipe instructions, right? So let's list down the ingredients, and let's loop through all the ingredients. Let's give this a class recipe ingredients.map, and yeah, we're gonna list all the ingredients in an li. And for the instructions, we'll do something similar. Instructions, we'll make use of an ordered list. We'll give it the class recipe instructions. We'll go through the instructions and show them here. So this is the structure for our recipe page. Now let's save this. Let's do a reload on this page. So you can see that we are seeing our detailed recipe instructions here, right? And if I click on home, I'm seeing the home page. If I click on any particular recipe, it's showing the recipe title, the rating for that recipe. Okay, let's add a star over here so that we understand that this is a rating, 4.6 stars. All right, so we have a basic server side rendered app with React server components, but we are not quite done yet. So for example, what we are going to do is we'll go to our header, and inside our nav, right, let's add a horizontal rule, and we'll add a input tag over here. Let's save this. Let's do a reload. So for example, I'm adding some text over here, right? I'm typing some text over here. When I go to the next page, this input is getting cleared, right? So in a traditional React app, all of this is handled by React, right? On the client side. App which is rendered on the client side, the state is preserved. Now, since our app is being rendered by the server and each request is going to give us a completely new server response, so these changes are lost and state is not being maintained. So this is a problem that we have now. So we're going to tackle this problem and we're going to follow a 3-step approach. Let's commit the changes that we have done so far. In the first step, what we are going to do is we are going to intercept all of the client side navigations from the server. So we are going to manually load the next page from the server so that reloading is prevented. So let's create a file over here inside the public folder. Let's call it as client.js, and we are going to add this file right over here inside our function over here where we are sending the HTML. So we're going to say HTML plus equals, let's add a script tag here. We're going to set the type as module, and we are going to specify the name of the script as client.js. All right, let's save this. So this should allow our client.js file to load along with the HTML that we are sending. Now here we are going to write the logic to intercept the navigations. We're going to say window dot add event listener. We're going to listen to all the click events that are happening within our window. We're getting the event object here. Let's keep a reference of the target object. We want to check whether the target object was a anchor tag or not. So we are going to intercept all the navigations which were done through an anchor tag over here. So if event.target.tag name is an anchor, so we are going to return that target as it is. Otherwise we are going to find the closest ancestor that was an anchor tag, because if you look at the structure over here, right, on the home page. Okay, hang on a sec, I made a mistake over here. We need to turn this into a let now. Okay, let's do a reload. So if you take a look at the structure of this, right, so whenever we are going to do a click, it's going to be on this image tag, and what we need to do is we want to get a reference of this anchor tag. So we are going to find the closest anchor tag. Let's add that logic here, and we are going to check that if our target is not an anchor tag, right, that means the output of this is null, right, we're going to return as it is. We're not going to intercept that. If you have pressed, you're clicking on the link and it's, opening on a new page, we don't want to intercept those navigations as well. So we're going to check for certain key press as well. So we're going to check if event.alt key or event.control key or event.meta key or event.shift key, right? If it's either one of these, you're going to return without doing anything. Otherwise, we're going to keep the value of the href attribute from the anchor tag, and we're going to check if the href doesn't start with a /, right, we're going to return as it is. Otherwise, we're going to prevent the default behavior, but we still want to update the URL, right, depending on the link that was clicked. So we're going to make use of the history which is available on the window object, and we're going to push the URL so that the URL is updated, but the navigation doesn't happen. And we'll write our own navigate function, and it's going to be called with a path name, and we're going to call the navigate function with this link, the value of the link which was clicked, right, or the path of that link. Okay, and also whenever we are going forward or backward by clicking on the forward and back button on the browser, we want to basically call the navigate function with the path name of the current location. Okay, all right, now here what we are going to do in our navigate function, before we do that, let's keep a reference of the current path name, and let's just set it to window.location path name, and here we are going to set this to path name and manually fetch the page from the server. So const response await fetch whatever is the path name that we have given over here, and we are going to get the HTML. So we'll process the response as text. We'll convert this into, and we have converted this into an async function, and then we'll just check if the path name is the current path name. Now since we are manually fetching the page, it is our responsibility to replace the contents inside the body tag. So we're just going to replace the contents of the body tag with the response that we're getting from the server, right? So we will find the start index of the body tag. So html.index of the body tag plus the length of this body tag. Okay, so this should give us the start index, and we'll get the body end index. So we'll say last index of and the closing body tag. And now we're going to create the body HTML. So we're going to slice the HTML response that we have got from the server. We'll give the start index and the end index. Okay, and we're going to say document.body.inner.html is equal to this body HTML. So we are manually replacing the contents without actually reloading the page. Let's save this now. Let's go to the network tab. Okay, let's do a reload, and you can see that our client.js file is also being loaded. Let's go to the sources tab, click on this, and see if our interception logic is working correctly. So you can see that our interception logic is working correctly. It fetched this response from the server, and let's also open the network tab. Let's go ahead. So we can see that this chocolate chip cookies, the initiator for this is client.js. That means, you know, this content is being manually fetched, and we are seeing the content of this chocolate chip recipe over here, the ingredients as well as the instructions, right? So this is happening without reloading the page. So the first part we have tackled, we have intercepted all of the client-side navigations. Now, in the next part, we are going to teach our server to transfer JSX over the wire instead of HTML, because we are going to use React to handle all of our states, right? And React understands JSX. So let's teach our server to send JSX over the wire now. So we'll come to server.js, and just like we had the function to convert JSX to HTML, so what we would want to do is the initial page load, it is going to return an HTML. So this part is going to work as it is, but for the subsequent requests, right? That is, whenever we are clicking on a page and a new page is being requested, we want to send JSX over the wire. All right, so that React is able to go through the JSX and figure out which parts have been modified and update the DOM accordingly. All right. So what we are going to do is we are going to split our code into two parts. Let's create a function send HTML. All right. This is going to accept the JSX, and the code that we had earlier, right? We'll move this code to this function, and this is going to return the HTML. And let's do one thing. Instead of returning the HTML, let this function also get the response object, and we're going to say response.send HTML. This, okay, all right. And similarly, we will have another function which will handle the subsequent request. So function send JSX, all right, and this is going to send the JSX. So we need to make a slight change to our client. This is the function that we are using to intercept the navigations, right? And these are the navigations that will happen once the initial page load is done. Here, what we're going to say now is that let's comment out this part, and we're going to fetch with the path name, okay? And we are going to add this query parameter JSX, so that we are able to distinguish between our normal request and the request with JSX. Okay, let's modify this function over here. We will create a variable URL, and we are going to make use of the URL object and pass the URL, and we'll get the complete path like this. Then we are going to check if URL.search parameters has this JSX, right, as the query parameters. We're going to call the send JSX function, and here we're going to call this with our router, and the URL is going to be URL.pathname here. So this is the JSX that we are going to be sending. Also, we need to clean up this JSX. We'll remove this so that a clean URL is sent to our router component. So URL dot search params dot delete. We're going to delete this JSX query parameter from the path. We're cleaning up this path. Else we're going to send HTML with the same path, and we'll use the response object. We'll pass the response object as the second parameter. Let's save this. Let's do a reload here, and it's giving us an error. It's saying request.url request is not defined. Okay, yeah. So this is coming from here. I made a mistake here. This needs to be, we just need to call this with JSX over here. Okay, let's save this. Let's do a page reload, and you can see that our page is working, right? Let's click on this. So for this, it should basically send a request with this JSX, which you can see over here, and nothing is happening right now. Let's do one thing. So this is the response which is being sent, right? Let's handle this response now. Let's go to our client and let's get rid of this code, and we will say over here that we'll alert this JSON string which is being sent by our server when send.jsx function gets called, right? So let's click over here. Let's do a reload. Let's go back. Okay. All right. Let's click on this link. The interception is happening, and you can see we're printing this alert, right? If you notice over here, it's just sending us this key null. Let me zoom this for you guys. So you can see over here that it is saying key null, ref null, and props. It is just sending the URL, right? With chocolate chip cookies. So this is the JSX returned by this router component, right? So it's just sending the JSX for the router component, but this is not useful for us because if you remember in the beginning, we had that entire JSX tree, right? That entire object representation, which had the HTML, then it had the props, and then it had the children with the head tag and the body tag and so on. We had that entire hierarchy, right? Whereas over here, we don't have this complete information. And here's the thing. We don't know what the router wants to show, which page the router wants to show, right? So we were expecting a full HTML tree, just like we had in the beginning. And this is not really useful to us because we need that entire tree to pass on to React. And even if we were to execute this router component, right, if we take a look at this code, then it's just going to return us the layout with this page, right? We don't know the contents of the home page or the recipe page. So we need to execute that as well. So basically we need a function which will execute our components on the server side and extract the JSX out of them. That will give us a complete JSX tree, just like we had initially, which we can then send over to the client. In order to do that, we need to write a new function which converts our server JSX into JSX, which is understood by the client. So let's write a function for that. It's going to be very similar to the function that we had written earlier for converting JSX to HTML. But instead of HTML, we are just going to execute our components and return more JSX, right? So I've just pasted that function over here. And instead of convert JSX to HTML, we are going to say convert JSX to client JSX. Okay, so here if it is string or number, we're going to return the JSX as it is. If let's get rid of this part, we don't need this now. If the JSX is an array, right, we're going to have a similar kind of implementation that we had over here, but we don't need to join these with a string. We're just going to return this promise here for all the child components, right? For all the children property within the object. Then we are going to check if the type of JSX is an object. The next thing we will check if it's a React element or not. If it's a string, right, instead of converting it into an HTML tag, we'll get rid of this logic. What we will say is that we will return the object as it is. We'll spread over the JSX and the props, right? The props might contain more JSX, so we need to call the same function recursively and we'll call it with the props. But in case if it's a component, we'll do the same as before, but we just need to get the JSX instead of the HTML over here, right? And if it's anything else apart from that, we're going to throw a new error which is not implemented yet, right? Okay, and here, in case it's, it's an object but it's not a React element, it's any arbitrary object, we still need to go through it and check if it contains any JSX inside it. So we're going to say const result is equal to object from entries. We're going to await and we're going to use promise.all. We're going to call this with object.entries. Let me just move this to the next line so that it is easier to see. We'll go through this JSX, get the key and the value, and the key is nothing but the prop name, and we're going to call the convert JSX to client JSX with the value. So it's going through all of the properties of the object and seeing if they contain any JSX or not. And whatever is the final result, we are going to return that result. Let's save this. All right, let's do a reload. Now let's click on this and we're getting the same response. All right, we haven't called this function yet. So where we have our send JSX function, here we're going to say const client JSX equals convert JSX to client JSX. We'll pass it the JSX. We'll wait for this since this is going to return a promise, and we'll send this client JSX now as the response. Okay, let's reload our website, click on this link. We're getting this complete JSX tree over here. So this is useful to us. So for the third and final part, we are going to send this JSX over the wire and we are going to ask React to take over managing the client side. So we will come to our client.js file. So we are going to use the hydrate root method, which allows us to attach React to an HTML which it did not create on the client. So let's import this function hydrate root from react dom/client. Okay, since we do not have a module loader like webpack or vite on the client side, we are going to use esm.sh to load esm package for this react dom library. So the way we use this is by giving the path of that package esm.sh, and we need the react dom client package. We will specify a version over here. We need version 18. Okay, just like we were using version 18 on the backend over here, and we want the client package and we want the dev mode for this. So this tool allows us to use this as a ESM module. So we have the hydrate root function. Now let's make use of this hydrate root function. Const root equals hydrate root. We will pass it the HTML document that we have over here, and it needs a initial JSX. Now in a traditional React app, we generally have a root component on the client side, right? Which is something like this app component. This contains the initial JSX. React needs this initial JSX in order to attach event listeners to the document, and it uses this initial JSX to handle state updates later on. But over here, we do not have a root component, right? We have nothing on the client side. We're getting everything from the server. So let's write a placeholder function over here, get initial JSX, which will be responsible for providing the initial JSX. Right now, this function is just going to return null. So we will come back to this part later on. Now let's move on to the part which we can do right now. That is, we can fetch the updated JSX from the client for subsequent navigations. So we will come over here inside our navigate function, and here what we are going to do is you're going to write a new function over here, function fetch JSX from the path name. Let's move this logic that we had written over here to here, turn this into an async function. The response that we're getting from the server, let us parse that so that once again we have a object, and here we will say let client, or rather const client JSX equals fetch JSX, and we will give it this path name and wait its response. Then we just need to call root.render for subsequent navigations, right? Let's save this and let's do a refresh. So we're getting this error, objects are not valid as React child. Let's see, we make it an error. So this is an async function. Let's keep this as a regular function now. Let's do a reload. So this is returning null. Let's click on our image and it's going inside navigate, and then it's finally rendering it with the client JSX that we're getting from the server. And we're also getting an error in the console that objects are not valid as a React child found keys. So basically what is happening over here is that if we go to our network tab, look at this request, let's preview it, and if you notice the response that we're getting, for React to consider this object as a valid JSX, it needs that symbol for React element. Now this property has been lost in the transfer process from sending the data from server to the client. It is happening because when we stringify the JSON string, the symbols are lost. So we need to figure out a way to restore the React symbol for this element on the client side after we're getting a proper response. So let's do that implementation now. Let's go to our server, and here where we are sending the response, we're going to call this with JSON.stringify. We are going to give it the client JSX, and the second parameter that we pass to this function is a replacer function that you can use to process the keys and the values. So we are going to write a function over here. Let's call it as replace token. This is going to get a key and a value, right? And here we are going to call this replace token function. Here we are going to check if the value is symbol for react.element. We are going to return $R, else if type of value is a string and value starts with a $sign, right? In order to avoid any clashes, what we are going to do is we are going to add a extra dollar and return the value with that, and otherwise we just return the value as it is. Okay, and then on the client we are going to restore the symbol for React element. What we are going to do is where we are passing our JSON string, right? This also accepts a reviver function, so we are going to say function restore tokens. This is also going to accept a key and a value as parameters, and we're going to check if value is $R, we're going to return symbol for React element, else if type of value is a string and it starts with $, we're going to remove that extra $, otherwise we are going to return the value as it is. So let's call this with the restore token function. Let's save this. So you can see that error is gone. Let's go back to our home route. Let me get rid of this. Now let's type something over here, Choco chip. Let's click on this and we're getting this as the response. Let's go back to our server and see if we made a mistake. So where we're sending the response, right? Let's set the headers over here, response.set header, content type to application JSON, so that we know the kind of content which is being sent. Let's do a reload. Let's type Choco chip here again. Okay. Let's click on this. So we're getting the children as text nodes. That's odd. Let's see if we made a mistake in our function convert JSX to client JSX. If the type of JSX is a string or number, we return the JSX as it is. Right. So here is the mistake. We need to mention convert JSX to client JSX. So that was a pretty silly mistake. Let's go back to our root node. Let's do a page reload. Now let's enter Choco chip. CHOCOCHIP. Okay, let's do a navigation now. And yeah, you can see that the value has been lost, right? Because it doesn't know what the initial HTML is. But let's enter the value again, choco chip. And if we go to the home route, you can see that the state is being preserved. Okay, you can go to any of the recipes, go back to our home route, and you can see that the state is being preserved, except for the first navigation. The state is being preserved because we have not provided the initial JSX for React to know how to apply those updates. But after subsequent navigations, it is having the JSX with it, so it's able to identify the difference between the JSX and apply those updates accordingly. So let's now add the implementation to provide the initial JSX. So if you notice, when this app is hit for the first time, right, when we go to the network tab, if we do a reload, you can see that we are doing SSR and sending it the response. When we are clicking on this link for subsequent navigations, right, the request will contain this JSX part. Even if we go back, let me get rid of this breakpoint and go over to the network. Even for the root, even for the home page, it is being called with this JSX. So the initial HTML that we are sending, we will provide the initial JSX as a global variable, right? So what we will do is, inside our send HTML function, we will call the convert JSX to client JSX on the JSX that we are sending, and make this available as a global variable. So we are going to add a script tag over here, and we are going to say window underscore underscore initial underscore JSX. So we are going to make this available as the initial JSX. Then what we are going to do is const client JSX string is equal to JSON.stringify client JSX, and we're going to call it with the replace token function. All right, and then we are going to say initial JSX is equal to JSON.stringify the client JSX string, and we're going to replace this pattern with this, and then we are going to close our script tag, and this is the response that we'll be sending. And here back in the client, where we had written the placeholder function for get initial JSX, and here we are going to read the value, right? So we are going to say const client JSX is equal to JSON.parse, and we are going to get the initial JSX, and we are going to restore the tokens, and this is what we are going to return, right? Let's save this. Let's do a reload. Let's type choco chip here and perform a navigation. You can see that the state is being preserved, and let's go back. Let's go to the next recipe. Let's come over here, go back. So our state is being managed right from the initial navigation. Let's make a small optimization to our server. If you notice over here, we are calling convert JSX to client JSX, right? This is going to give us the client JSX. Now to get the client JSX, we execute the components, right? And here also, to convert the JSX to HTML, we are executing the components. So for each request, we are executing the components twice. What we can do is, since this is going to give us the complete JSX, we can pass this client JSX to this function, and let's do a reload, and you can see that this is still working, right? Then what we can do here is that instead of using the convert JSX to HTML, we can make use of the render to string function, which is provided by the React team. That is the implementation which React uses. Let's add React DOM, and let's add the latest version for React 18. So we have added this. Now what we can do is, since this is the complete JSX string, this no longer needs to be an async function. We can just comment this out, and we can say let HTML equals render to string, and we can pass our client JSX over here. Let's do a reload, and you can see that our page is being rendered. We can say choco chip over here. We can do navigations, and our state is being preserved. let's also take a look at the console. So you can see that we're just getting some warning messages for keys, but everything else is working as it is. And let's do a page reload. You can see that the page is being loaded. So I'm typing some random text over here and we're just getting warnings. So that's okay. You guys can take care of that later on. So hooray! We have managed to implement server-side rendering along with React server components. Now let's fix some errors such as this one, right? That's not able to find this favicon file. So what is happening here is that whatever URL is coming through the request, it's trying to request for the favicon and it's going to the router and it's trying to find .icon.json file. So we will just filter out such requests by adding this piece of code. So we'll just check if it contains favicon, then we will just send an empty response and return. Alright, let's reload our website, and we're also getting this char set error. So let's go to our layout, and since we're using React, some of the properties have to be in camel case. Alright, so all the errors are gone. So React client component refers to all the functionality of React that we're used to doing on the client side, such as using hooks like the use state, use effect, and all the things that we were able to do in React before React server components. So that is what we mean by React client components, code which gets executed on the client side, that is on the browser, right? So let's see how we can do that. So the first thing that we will do is that we'll try to convert our author component into a client component. All right, so let's create a folder over here, call it as components, and we will create a file over here, author.js. Let's locate our author component. I'll cut this from here and paste it here, and what we will try to do is we'll try to use a hook in here. So import use state from React, and let's just add a dummy counter variable here like this, and let us include a span in here. You click on the span and we will increment the counter by 1, and we will also display the count here, and let's add a line break here. All right, another thing that we'll do is just like how the React documents state that we need to be able to distinguish between the components which are executed on the server and on the client with the use client directive. So let's add that over here, and we will be adding our own implementation for this. And here where we're using author component, right, which is this place, we will import that component. So let's export this like this, and let's import it here like this. So let's do a reload, and here it is giving us this error that hooks can only be called inside the body of a function component, and so it's basically giving us some errors because we are trying to execute a client component on the server. So we need to prevent our client component from being executed on the server, but at the same time we need to add a reference to that client component inside the JSX that is being returned to the client, so that that component gets executed on the client. So now let's write logic to distinguish the component with the use client directive written on it from the other server components. So what we are going to do is, for that purpose, we are going to use our loader that we had written over here, because this loader goes through all of our files and it has a reference of the source code. We will use our loader to set a special property inside our component which has this use client directive inside it, so that we are able to distinguish it. So here we are going to check if new result.code includes the use client directive. If that is the case, what we need to do is we'll add a special property that will store the file paths, and we will use that property to skip the execution of this component on the server side. So if you take a look at this, what we will do is whenever it encounters a component with this use client directive, we are going to add a property of this kind is client component, and we are going to store the relative path of this component. So it will be ./components/author.js. So we want to store a property like this, a special property like this, whenever we find this use client directive, and when this code is being transformed, right, when this JSX is being converted, in that case we will add this special property to this transformed file dynamically. In order to extract the name of the component, we are going to search for this function keyword and this opening parentheses, and whatever comes in between this is the name of our component. So that's the logic that we are going to write here. Const func is equal to function, then we are going to say const function start. So we are going to look for the opening parentheses, then we'll find the index of this start index. We are going to go through our code, find the index of this function keyword, and add the length of this function to this to get the start index. Similarly, we'll find the end index. So we are going to say new result.code.index of the opening parentheses. Then what we are going to do is we are going to say new result.code plus equals, we're going to add a new line to our existing code, and we're going to say new result.code.substring. We're going to give the start index and end index. So this should give us the name of our component. Then we're going to call trim on this so that all the spaces are removed. Then we're going to add the special property __ client component, and that is equal to the path of this file. So what we're going to do is that this new result, right, the transformed code contains it has this options property which contains the file name, and we're going to call the split function. And since the file name has this public directory in it, we're going to split it by using the public directory. And if we take the second part of the array which is returned by the split function, that should give us the relative path of this client component. So that is what we are going to set to this property, and we are going to close it with a semicolon. Let's save this. Let's also save our author component. All right, so it's saying malformed regular expression. Let's put this in double quotes like this. Okay, and we are going to have since we're using relative path, let's add a dot over here so that the path becomes /. All right, and let's log this to the console so that we can see the output over here. So you can see it has created this special property. This is a client component, right, with the use client directive. And once it has transpiled it, you can see it has this special property at the end, author __ client component is equal to the relative path of this component. All right, so this is what we wanted. Now with the help of this property, we are going to prevent the execution of this component on the server side. So now we will go to our server.js file where we have written code to convert JSX to client JSX, and here is where we are executing our components, right? We are going to check over here if our component has this special property that we have created, right, __ client component. Okay, if it has this property, that means we don't want to execute this component. So in the else part, we will move our existing code, and here we are going to return a reference to our client component, and we're going to set the type as the path of this component's file. So we are going to say file : component, and this client component property contains the path of this relative path of this client side component, right, and the props. So we are going to go through its props and check if it contains any more JSX. So here we are going to say object from entries, and then we are going to say object dot entries. We will just pass the props of that component here. So now this component will not be executed on the server, but it will keep a reference of the component and its path, so that when this JSX is sent to the client, we have the ability to download the file of this component and then execute this on the client side. Let's save this and let's try to reload our page. Now we're getting a different error, right? It is saying element type is invalid, expected a string. This is happening because the initial JSX has the reference to the client component and it does not know how to execute this component on the client. So now let's teach our client side to execute this component. So for that, what we are going to do is we are going to create a function which is able to go through the JSX that we are returning, and it is able to extract the JSX of the client component and add it to the existing JSX. All right, let's do that part now. So here we are going to come to our public folder. We are going to create a new file, common.js, and this is going to have a function similar to our convert JSX to client JSX function. Let me copy this, paste this here, and what this is going to do is it's going to go through our JSX which is being sent to the client, and from there it's going to identify the client component and try to get its JSX and add it to the JSX that we already have. Alright, so we are going to call this function as rebuild JSX with client components. So this part is similar. We are going to check if it's a string or number, just return the JSX. If it's an array, then we will call this code recursively. If it's an array, then we need to call the same function for each of the child elements. If it's an object, then we need to check if it's a React element or not. If the type is a string, that means it's a normal React element. Otherwise, if it's a function, that means it's a component. And here we need to make the modification. We are going to check over here if the type is an object and if it has the file property. So in that case, what we need to do is return the JSX as it is, right? Its type is going to be the reference to the function returned by this particular file. So what we are going to do here is that we're going to import the file which is at this path. Since this will happen over the network, let's await this and let's pick out the default path. Okay, let us save this, and for the props we are going to call the same function and we will just pass the props of this component, so that in case the props also contain any more properties, all of those are covered. Else we are going to throw a new error that this is not implemented yet. In case if it's not a React element, then what we will do is we will go through all the properties of this object and see if it contains any further JSX or not. So we are going to say promise.all, we are going to say object.entries for this entire JSX, call the map function on it, extract the prop name and the value, and we are going to call this recursively, and whatever is the result, we're going to return the result. And let's get rid of the remaining code from here. Okay, let's save this and let's export this function. All right, so we have completed the implementation for our rebuild function. Then let's head over to our server. Now what we need to do over here is that since we are sending the initial HTML of the entire JSX that we have, we also need to send the initial HTML of the client component which we have. In order to do that, we will execute the function that we have just written over here to get the client side JSX of our component as well. So final JSX is equal to rebuild JSX with client components. We will pass this client JSX to this function, whatever is the final JSX, that is what we are going to pass to this render to string function, so that not only does it return the HTML for our server components, but also for the client side component. All right, and we will send the initial JSX as it is with just the client side JSX with placeholder for the client component. Let's save this. Let's head over to the client.js file, and here where we are getting our initial JSX, we're going to return rebuild JSX with client components and pass the client JSX to this function. Let me just correct this path over here, and since this is going to return us a promise, let's await its result. Save this. Let's do a reload now. Okay, so we're getting this error. Since this was an asynchronous function, we need to await its response. Let's reload now, and you can see that we are getting the HTML for the server components as well as our client component, right, with the default state. Now if you notice over here, we're getting this error that there's an unexpected token inside the author.js file. Let me do a reload of this page again. If you notice over here, when it came across client.js and we were trying to rebuild the JSX with client components, it tried to download the file over here of that client component and it tried to execute this code, but it was not able to do that because even the browser is not able to understand JSX by default. So just like how we transform this file at the server side, we need to send the transformed file at the client side as well. So we will be using Babel for that once again. So what we need to do is, where we are trying to get this file, right, we're going to add this special query parameter RCC for React client component, and whenever our server receives a request for this client side component code, right, we will transform that file using Babel and then send that response back to the client. Okay, so here we're going to use the template literal syntax and we are going to add RCC over here. Okay, and on the server we're going to write a custom middleware. We're going to say app.use, which is going to accept a request response and the next function. We're going to get the URL. So let's just copy this statement and we're going to check if url.searchparams.has this RCC query parameter. We're going to clean this parameter up and then we're going to make use of Babel. So let's do one thing. Let's move this configuration to our common.js file. Let's export this as well, and our node JSX loader is going to import this from common.js, and then here on the server we are going to import Babel. We are going to import Babel from Babel core, and here we are going to get the Babel result. We are going to call the babel.transform file asynchronously. We're going to give the path of our file. So it is public /url.path name. Okay, the path of the component, and we are going to pass the Babel options which we have stored inside the common.js file. Since we're using await over here, let's turn this into an asynchronous function. If we're getting the transformed file, so babel result.code. So if the code has been transformed, we're going to set the header content type application JavaScript, and we are going to send the code. And since we are not using any module loader on the client side, it will not know what React is, and we're using esm.sh for that. So we are going to call replace all on this code, and we are going to replace React with this esm path. Okay, and if our request doesn't contain this RCC query parameter, we're going to pass the request to the next middleware. Now you can see over here our page has been reloaded. Okay, and we're no longer getting the exception for that JSX. We're just getting some key prop error over here. Let's head down to our footer where we have our client component. Let's click on this, and you can see that our client side component logic is working as well. Let's go to the sources tab and let's head over to author.js. If we click on this, you can see that our client side code is being executed, right? The moment we're clicking on this, our client side code is being executed and the state value is getting updated over here. So we have the entire functionality working now. We have React server components, we have components which can run on the client as well, and they're server rendered by default, right? And suppose we try to add another component over here which is on the client side. All we need to do is let's implement the counter component over here. We will add the use client directive over here. You're going to say function counter. This is the logic that we have for the counter. Let's export this as the default, right? Let's save this. Let me get rid of this functionality from here and let's go to our server, head over to the layout, and right below the author component, let's add our counter component. Let's save this, just checking the path of the counter component. So it is getting this from here. If we do a reload of our site now, we are getting this error because we forgot to import use state from React. Let's do that now. Okay, let's do a reload and you can see our client component is working seamlessly. All we had to do is write the use client directive over here and we have the state functionality working. Whatever hooks that are supported on the client side are now running over here. If we remove this directive, right, and we save this, let's try to do a reload. You can see that we are getting this error over here now that it cannot read properties of null. It's not able to execute use state. Okay, so that is because this is a component, a client side component, and it can only run on the client side. So that is why we have the use state directive. So this part is working as well, just like how it would work in NextJS. When you forget to write the use client directive, it would give you an error, right? So we have done the reload. You can see that everything is working. You guys can fix this part. So this is our final site. So client side state is working. Okay, and then when we're clicking on this, we're still getting this error, right? Because we are not rebuilding our client side components with the JSX which is being returned on subsequent requests. So let's do that over here as well. So when we are calling fetch JSX, right, it is giving us the JSX, this JSX that we are getting. Okay, what we need to do is we need to get the final JSX from this client JSX, and that is what we need to pass over here to our root.render function. Let's save this. Let's go back. Let's reload. Click on this link and we have the entire functionality working. If we type something over here, for example, home page, right? Let me close this and let's update the state over here as well. We will click on this home icon. You can see that our state is being maintained over here. We do not have any other errors except for the key prop ones. And let me change the state of this counter. Go to the recipe of this pizza, right? And you can see our state is being preserved for the client component as well as inside the input field. So all of this is working very well. So you have the entire app now which is working with React server components, server-side rendering, and client-side components as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do share this with others and please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. I'm looking forward to bringing you more intriguing content in the future as well. So that is it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next video.